There's a number that changes everything. Not $1,000,000, not 100,000, 10,000. Your first $10,000 is unlike any other money you will ever accumulate. It behaves differently. It works differently. And the way you treat it will determine almost everything about your financial life for the next 30 years. But nobody sits you down and explains what that number actually does. So by the time most people figure it out, they have already wasted the most important financial window of their entire life. Here's what the first $10,000 actually is. It is not just money. It is a threshold. On one side of that threshold, you are financially fragile. One unexpected bill, one missed paycheck, one car repair separates you from debt. On the other side of that threshold, something shifts. Not dramatically, not immediately, but permanently. Because money, once it crosses a certain mass, begins to generate its own gravitational pull. It starts attracting more of itself. And that process, once started, almost never stops. Psychologist Brad Klontz spent years studying the emotional relationship between people and money. One of his most consistent findings was this. The way you feel about money when you have very little of it becomes the blueprint your brain uses for every financial decision you make for the rest of your life. If you grew up watching money disappear, your brain learned that money is temporary. If you watch money create security, your brain learned that money can be permanent. Your first $10,000 is the moment you get to rewrite that blueprint. It is the first time your brain gets to experience money as something that stays. But there is a specific reason the first 10,000 is harder than every other 10,000 after it. And understanding this reason is what most financial advice completely skips. Behavioral economist Shlomo Benartzi at UCLA has shown through decades of research that human beings experience the pain of spending money most acutely when they have the least of it. When you are trying to save your first $500, every purchase feels enormous. Every decision feels like a sacrifice. The psychological cost of building that first pile of money is disproportionately high compared to the actual dollar amounts involved. This is why most people never get there. Not because they cannot mathematically save $10,000, because the emotional friction of doing it feels unbearable at the beginning. The people who push through that friction and reach $10,000 discover something the other side never gets to see. The sacrifice does not get harder. It gets easier. Because once you have $10,000 sitting in an account, the psychological relationship with money changes. You stop feeling like someone who cannot afford things. You start feeling like someone who is choosing not to spend. That shift in identity is worth more than the $10,000 itself. Now let's talk about what $10,000 actually does when it is invested. At a 10% average annual return, the historical nominal average of the S&P 500, $10,000 invested today becomes approximately $26,000 in 10 years, without you adding a single additional dollar, without you doing anything at all except leaving it alone. In 20 years, that same $10,000 becomes $67,000. In 30 years, it becomes $174,000, using annual compounding, from $10,000, sitting still, doing nothing. This is what financial educators call a lump sum base. It is the foundation on which everything else compounds. When you add your monthly contributions on top of an existing base, the math accelerates in ways that feel almost unfair, because now you have two engines running simultaneously. The base is compounding. The contributions are compounding, and they are compounding on top of each other. Here is the concrete example. Two people both invest $450 a month into a low-cost S&P 500 index fund. Person A starts with zero. Person B starts with $10,000 already in the account. After 30 years, Person A has approximately $1 million. Person B has approximately $1,215,000. The only difference is the $10,000 head start. That head start, compounded over 30 years, added nearly $200,000 to the final total. $10,000 became nearly $200,000 in additional wealth simply by existing first. This is why the first $10,000 is not just important. It is structurally different from every dollar that comes after it. So how do you actually get there? Because knowing that $10,000 matters and knowing how to build it are two completely different problems. The research on this is clear and it points to one conclusion. The method matters far less than the automaticity. Psychologist Walter Mischel, famous for his work on self-control and delayed gratification, showed that the people who consistently achieved long-term goals were not the ones with the most willpower. They were the ones who had removed the need for willpower entirely by building systems that made the right behavior automatic. Applied to money, this means one thing. Automate the savings before you can spend it. Every time your paycheck lands, a fixed amount moves immediately into a separate account before you see it, before you feel it, before your brain registers it as available. Not after you pay your bills, not after you buy groceries. Before. The moment the money arrives, a portion of it disappears into a place you are not touching. This is the principle behind what behavioral economists call pay yourself first. It is not a new idea, but the research on it is overwhelming. People who automate their savings consistently outperform people who try to save what is left over at the end of the month, regardless of income level. The end of the month almost never has anything left. The beginning of the month always has the full paycheck. The amount you automate matters less than the consistency. $50 a month automated is more powerful than $500 saved manually and inconsistently, because the $50 habit, once installed, tends to grow. You adjust to having less available. You stop noticing the money is gone. And 6 months later, you automate another 50, and then another. The system builds itself. Where does this money go while you are building toward $10,000? If it is your emergency fund, the money that protects you from going into debt when something unexpected happens, it goes into a high-yield savings account. Not a standard savings account earning 0.01%. A high-yield savings account available through online banks that currently offers between 4 and 5% annual interest. This is not an investment, it is a holding place. But at 4 to 5%, it is at least keeping pace with or exceeding inflation while you build. Once you have 3 to 6 months of expenses saved as an emergency fund, the next $10,000 you build goes directly into a Roth IRA, invested in a low-cost S&P 500 index fund. This is where the compounding engine truly ignites. This is where the numbers you just heard, 67,000, 174,000, actually happen. There is one more thing about the first 10,000 that nobody talks about. It changes your relationship with risk. When you have nothing saved, every financial decision feels dangerous. You avoid thinking about money because thinking about it only produces anxiety. You make short-term decisions, spending to relieve stress, avoiding investments because they feel too uncertain. Because short-term decisions are the only ones available to someone without a financial buffer. When you have $10,000, you develop what researchers call financial slack, the psychological space that comes from knowing you can absorb a setback. And financial slack, it turns out, dramatically improves the quality of every financial decision you make. You negotiate your salary more confidently. You take calculated risks in your career. You do not panic when the market drops. You think in years instead of weeks. The $10,000 does not just sit there compounding in an account. It compounds in your psychology. It changes the kind of person you become. Your first $10,000 is not just a financial milestone. It is the moment your entire relationship with money begins to shift. The moment you cross from fragile to stable, from reactive to intentional, from someone who earns money to someone whose money works. Nobody tells you this when you are starting out. They talk about budgets and cutting lattes and the vague idea of investing. They do not tell you about the threshold. They do not tell you that the first 10,000 is structurally different, psychologically transformative, and mathematically irreplaceable. Now you know. The only question left is how soon you start.